Media Lab, and so on. So the first question that I have, and we'll go ahead and get this out of the way right away, is what are your thoughts on Common Core? Are you for or against it, and why? Kira?
Thank you. I am for standards. I think standards are important. We have to trust our teachers, but we also have to verify that our children are being taught in an effective manner and that we can hold them accountable for teaching our children. When you talk about standards, you're talking about raising the bottom and pushing the top. And I think you absolutely can do that with those standards. I have school-age children. I have a daughter who's 6. I have a son who's in pre-K. He's in 3-year-old pre-K or 3-year-old pre-K. And I see the standards, and I've seen what happens when we continually change things on our teachers and change things on our schools. And I don't think what we're doing is wise to continue to say we're going to change these standards on our kids. It's ill-advised, and I believe it's irresponsible. But that said, I also think that we can be able to look at these standards and understand why we're doing that, and why is this Common Core thing coming about. When I ran in 2010, I said we need to say no to Race to the Top funding. That's not what we need. We don't need to take federal money, because with federal money comes federal standards. But we also need to understand that Common Core is not a federal mandate. It came from Sonny Perdue. How much time do I have? Came from Sonny Perdue and the Republican Governors Association, and they in turn passed it over to the National Governors Association, who then turned it over to the Association of State School Officers. So it's not something, and this happened years and years ago, and we adopted it in 2010. I don't think that Common Core or the standards that we're teaching our children is something that is horrible. What I think is getting in the way of it is some of the local school boards' choices of curriculum. And you can choose standards and have standards and allow the local school boards to choose the curriculum that goes with those standards that suits the needs and the wants of that local community. Thank you.
Excellent. Vince, can you repeat the question? What are your thoughts on Common Core? Are you for or against it, and why?
I will say from the start that our standards need to be put in place by Georgia educators, our Georgia community, our Georgia General Assembly, and all the folks sitting out here should have the input on our standards here in Georgia. We do not need Washington telling us what we need to put in our standards. I think we're fully capable of setting the standards ourselves. That's right off the bat. Privacy issues, same thing. I think we don't need to have our privacy issues out in the street of our kids. I will also tell you that I'm for local, pushing it down for local control and letting those local boards not set standards, but allow them to be innovative in their systems and as they begin and they educate our kids. So, whether you're for Common Core or against Common Core, I'll tell you one more thing is that I am a military person. And so we move quite frequently from, if you move from Kansas to Wisconsin to Georgia, just want to make sure when you get here that we're in the ballpark. I just want to make sure, hey, I'm not saying we've got to be on the same page, but I want to make sure the standards are rigorous. I want to make sure that I can have a way to measure that against other states as we matriculate a child through education. So that's kind of where I stand, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Cheryl?
Right now, Common Core is such a mess, and it's certainly a fire point for this particular race. Even the people that love Common Core aren't happy with it because we didn't do the testing. They felt like maybe we were backing down and didn't want to feel competitive with the rest of the country. It's more like what Fitz said, that they didn't want the national, federalized government taking control of our education. I think, am I still on? Oh, okay, it sounded like it cut out. Of course we need standards, and we want rigorous standards, but we want local control, and we want to find some version of standards that are palatable to the Georgia voters and the Georgia parents. We really don't need any more testing. Those of you with kids in school know that between the end of course test and they did at least get rid of the graduation test, that the last thing we need is more tests. Sometimes I do ponder if the testing companies might be behind some of these standards, that they're making money sending out the test. I just read that in New York, I think the Pearson company sent the test out already to the New York students, and they haven't even adopted Common Core yet. So I think we have to be careful with these tests that come out. I think that our local superintendents, we vote them in. We vote our school boards in, and they select our superintendents. If we have a problem with them, we can vote the school boards out, and they can get a different superintendent. But you can't go to Washington and vote all of that out. So I would have to say that Common Core is just not going to work in Georgia as it is stated now.
Thank you. Alan, do you need me to repeat the question?
I'm fine. Okay. These standards are what we have now, and they're not going away tomorrow, whether we love them, hate them, or anything in between. So it's what we have to understand is my plan is this, is that every one of these standards, everything is fluid. It is not etched in stone. And my plan is to go to the RESAs, to bring our teachers into local places, all representing every school and every school system in this state, so they can come in and look at what's happening. So they can see what the curriculum is it serving our kids, is it preparing our kids for graduation, is it preparing them for the real world. And as we make changes, as we think things are fine, as we make changes, we can review it every year, because that's what happens to these standards, to make sure that they're up to date and keep up with changes in our society. It is an economic engine, just so students can move from one state to the other, to know, because there's nothing more embarrassing as a high school principal when you have to tell a kid that transfers in, you have to take this extra class because we have it in Georgia and you don't have it in Arizona. It's even worse when our kids transfer from Georgia to another state and they look at you like, what are you learning in Georgia now? So that's important too. It is driven by assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, we can talk all about the standards we want to. The standards are driven by assessment and what we answer to assessment, because once you get the assessing part of it, you have to answer what you've taught to what's assessed. And a lot of times we don't have some control over that we need to get to. And we need to push this control back to a lot of our local systems. Remember, a lot of our local systems are small. They can't afford a curriculum director to review 52 different types of standards for every grade in K-12 and all of the 4 academic classes. So you're talking about a lot of things you have to do, and it is an ever-changing, ever-fluid document that during my administration we will look at continuously in which to improve.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I strongly support the standards that we are currently teaching in public schools in Georgia. But at the end of the day, my opinion is not the most important opinion. The opinion of our teachers, and we've surveyed our teachers across this state. Over 11,000 teachers responded. 70 to 75% of our teachers are in favor or strongly in favor of the standards we're teaching. They're not perfect. They're good standards, but they're not perfect. And I am very open to an open, transparent, periodic review of the standards to make sure that we get it right. But you know what? We already do that. We already have a process in place where we put the standards before the public. We allow people to weigh in. Those standards get gone over multiple times as they're developed before they become final. And I'm for that. I want to get it right. I believe we're close. We're not there, but we're going to use the review process and get it from the teachers, those closest to the kids in the classroom. I was fortunate enough to attend the hearing last week where approximately 60 people spoke. The vast majority of them spoke on behalf of the standards. But let me tell you who some of those organizations were. It was representatives from the military. There was a rear admiral who represented 400 admirals and generals. I have personally met with the student organization, the children of military families, and heard the horror stories of what happens when they have to transfer. The very men and women who are protecting our rights to be in this room having this discussion, those are the children who suffer the most if we're all over the board. So they're not perfect, but they're very good. Had lunch today with a school board member, small district, 3,000 students. He said, if you change the standards, it will cost our district $500,000 in staff development and everything that we'll have to do. Our districts can't afford it. It's not best for teachers, kids.
Thank you. Well, I'm quite sure teachers don't want to flip-flop again because they have faced that, and so I'm sympathetic to that. But Common Core is just a bad idea. It's centralization. I'm waiting to hear, well, if you like your history, you can keep your history. When's that going to happen? And that's a problem. I mean, we've heard that kind of rhetoric before, and this comes from the same bureaucrats that in 2002, if we're also open, you might be surprised to learn that in 2002, the same people passed a social studies curriculum for K through 5 that does not mention the Bill of Rights until 4th grade, but yet in 3rd grade talks about the 9 important people who expanded rights. Keep in mind, we haven't talked about what rights are. You can look this up on GPS on the DOE's website. Those 9 important people include not one Republican, but they do include LBJ and FDR and Cesar Chavez. That's what our children are learning right now. It's social theory, social movement theory, and it's a problem. So forgive me if I'm not real keen on what the bureaucrats are trying to sell us here. I call these programs sometimes the Full Employment and Funding Act for bureaucrats, textbook companies, and testing companies. It is a fallacy that we need, that we need this to be standardized. We can tell, we need to get out of the criterion reference test business and get into the criterion normed test business, because you could take an Iowa right now, have decades of data on that, and know where your kid is relative to kids across the nation. So that's the kind of thing we need to get into. And we shouldn't be making policy on a small group. I'm a military brat. My father was a Green Beret in Vietnam. We moved. I was born in Fort Devens, Massachusetts. But I'm telling you, that's not the majority. And to make that as an excuse for the reason we should have this isn't good. And I will tell you that now fully 17 states have either pulled out or about to pull out or never went into the Common Core Park assessment.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, in 2010, I was one of the Republican candidates, and one part of my platform at that point was I was against race to the top. I was against the Common Core. One of the things I think we have to understand to start off with, that we as in Georgia, is that if we're going to improve education, we have to control education. And that means that, first of all, we need to follow the Constitution. Education is not a enumerated power given in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It is something that's very specific in Article 8 of our Georgia Constitution, which basically gives, really control at the local level. So I think, we need to begin at that point just to follow the Constitution. Amazing what happens when you follow the rule of law and the way things that were set up with our founding fathers. The standards themselves, again, to be able to address everything, we need to make sure that we own the copyright. We need to make sure that we own everything about what goes on in Georgia education as far as our standards are concerned. Because each child is different. As I said before, we need to personalize education and not standardize education. So by doing so and controlling education and again rejecting, the notion that, this is a blanket, we need to, go back, look at the standards, look at everything thoroughly. We need to also do a better job of implementation. Now, you've heard there are a lot of teachers who are, for or perhaps with this, but one of the very critical things we've looked at is that implementation has been horrible. It was horrible under No Child Left Behind. So we are chasing down the same road that we are just, just came out of. So I think if history, if we do not pay attention, we will repeat it. Well, I can let you know for certain that as an individual who implemented No Child Left Behind, who has seen what we are doing here with Race to the Top, we are repeating history all over. And it will not serve our education, it will not serve our kids, it will not serve our teachers. So, let's look at this, make sure that whatever we adopt is sound. We could have done better, but we chose not to. Thank you.
Thank you.
As you know, I've been fighting Common Core for about 2 years, and I have the answer. I could tell you for a long time about the problem and why we have that problem, but I have the answer, and I'm about to tell you the answer at the end of what I'm going to say. But first of all, to all the military people out there, Common Core is different in Georgia than it is in all the other states except for Utah, because Georgia's state Department of Education decided to adopt integrated Common Core, where we have coordinate geometry, coordinate algebra and analytic geometry. All the other states that have Common Core have traditional Common Core, where they have Algebra 1, Algebra 2 geometry. So it doesn't even apply, that whole thing about everyone being able to pick up so easily. That doesn't apply to Georgia or Utah. I have the answer to the battle over standards, because the reason why we're having these problems, we've never had these battles before. Why do we have them now? It's because our standards are so grade specific. Not only that, they are tied to specific tests. So when you talk about criterion normed, I'm not for criterion normed tests. What I'm for are tests that will test a whole range of grade bands so that teachers can be free to meet the needs of their students. The way it's set up now is not working. I can fix all of that. All of these debates over standards will go away because we will fix the testing system. We can meet the requirements of No Child Left Behind without having to take this race to the top money. We went from the frying pan to the fire when we did that. That needs to be undone, and we need to get our educational system back so teachers can meet the needs of their students.
Thank you. Okay.
Why? I'm against Common Core. I think that Common Core is the educational equivalent of Obamacare. I think it's the federal government's best shot at trying to get its arms into the kitchen tables of each family and in the classrooms of every school. I think the federal government should not be involved in our education. I think the federal government should be limited to what the Constitution says it should be limited to. I'm a constitutional conservative and I strongly believe that. But I think we as a state could do better than Common Core. I think that Common Core standards aren't the best we could do, and I think that no Washington bureaucrat can come up with better standards than we can for our own children. And because of that, I'll do everything I can to make sure that every standard that touches our classrooms is made by you, parents, teachers, and educators who know our children, who know our teachers, and who know where we need to be going forward as a state on education. Thank you.
What do